When I was 25, I decided to take a solo trip to Rio de Janeiro. My favorite DJ was playing that weekend, and I had always wanted to visit anyway. I had traveled solo many times before and never encountered any problems. Airbnb options were a bit pricey outside the main city, but I found a really nice and comfortable one. It was a cozy, single-story house, but the interior was modern and spotless. I landed on Friday, unpacked at the Airbnb, grabbed dinner, and headed to a rooftop venue where the DJ was performing. That first day and night went smoothly. At the rooftop, I met some cool people: James, Ethan, and Jess. Ethan and Jess were a couple, and James seemed to be tagging along as the third wheel. The next day, I met up with them again since they were also visiting. We had brunch together and spent the day sightseeing, checking out Christ the Redeemer, Sugarloaf Mountain, and hitting the beach afterward. Unfortunately, they had tickets to another show that night, which I didn't have. So, I was back to exploring solo, which was fine since I'm used to it. Later I got hungry and decided to head back toward the Airbnb, which was just outside the city. On my way back, I found a restaurant. I speak a little Portuguese, but I'm definitely not fluent, so I tried to stick to places where people seemed to speak English while I was on my own. This restaurant had an English menu posted on the window, so I decided to give it a try. It was a small, dimly lit place. A lot of the restaurants in the area were expensive, but this one seemed affordable, so I stayed. The dining area was long and narrow. There were a few people seated further down, and a man, who looked to be about 50, was sitting at a table next to mine. I wondered if he was another tourist since we were the only ones eating alone. When the server came over, he initially spoke in Portuguese. I asked, in Portuguese, if he spoke English, and he said yes. So, I placed my order in English. I noticed the man at the nearby table watching me as I ordered, which felt a bit unsettling. After the waiter left, the man complimented my Portuguese, saying it sounded good. I thanked him, but then he started chatting with me in Portuguese, trying to give me a language lesson. I think he thought he was being charming, but it was really just creepy and irritating. I kept checking my phone to avoid conversation, but he continued talking in both English and Portuguese. To be polite and avoid awkwardness, I tried my best to respond in Portuguese, even as he corrected my mistakes. The conversation was pretty standard. He asked where I was from, why I was in Rio, what I had done that day, and where I was staying. I made up a story about staying with a friend. Things got really uncomfortable when he told me I looked sexy. When I spoke Portuguese, I was hoping he'd leave soon, but when the waiter brought him his meal, I knew he wasn't going anywhere. Luckily, my food didn't take long to arrive. I had ordered a pork stew dish. The man asked how it was, and I just told him it was fine. Thankfully, he started talking less once his food came. I ate as quickly as I could, eager to leave. When I finished, I immediately asked for the bill because I didn't want to talk to this guy anymore. To my annoyance, he also asked for the bill right after I did, even though he hadn't finished eating. Once I paid, I got up to leave. The man said something in Portuguese, but I just said goodbye and walked out. It was dark by then, and the streets were a bit quieter. I walked for a while and came to an intersection. While waiting to cross, I noticed the man from the restaurant standing across the street. He was definitely watching me, but quickly looked away when I noticed him. At first I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just going in the same direction. It wasn't impossible. But as I continued walking, I kept glancing back to see if he was still there. I didn't see him again until I reached the Airbnb. I unlocked the door, and before going inside, I took one last look around. That's when I saw him again, standing way down the block, watching from the corner. My heart sank. He had followed me. I rushed inside, locked the door, and closed all the blinds. Now he knew where I was staying. In a panic, I called my dad and explained what was happening. He told me to stay alert, make sure everything was locked, and even suggested keeping a knife close by. It was Saturday night, and my flight wasn't until late Sunday, so I still wanted to go out. Eventually, I called an Uber to take me to a bar downtown that had a house music event. I stayed for a couple of hours and then took another Uber back to the Airbnb. When I got inside, I sat down on the couch to relax, but I noticed something odd. I could hear the sounds from outside, and I saw the blinds in the kitchen moving from a breeze. The kitchen window was open. I knew I had closed all the windows earlier because the air conditioning was on. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. I left the house as quickly as I could and called the emergency number. I did my best to explain to the operator in Portuguese that someone had broken into the house. The police arrived within minutes. I was hiding across the street behind a bush and came out when I saw them pull up. One of the officers spoke some English, so I explained that the window was open and I was being followed earlier. The police entered the house, shouting commands I didn't understand. When they emerged, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They were walking out with the man from the restaurant in handcuffs. It was the most shocking moment of my life, an overwhelming mix of emotions: disbelief, relief, and horror. If I hadn't called the police, or if I had gone into the bedroom where he was likely hiding, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. Thankfully, he was stupid enough to leave the window open, which led to his capture. I should have listened to my dad and made sure all the windows were locked. I just never imagined he would actually try to break in. I left Brazil the next day and haven't been back since. It was the holiday season, and most of my friends were out of town, so I decided to look for a part-time job to make some extra cash. After waiting for about a week, I finally got a call from a nearby restaurant asking me to come in for a trial shift. I had a decent amount of experience in waitressing, so I wasn't surprised when the owner offered me the position. The place had a really eerie vibe. It was small, dimly lit, and every now and then a terrible odor would waft through the air. It wasn't the type of place I would normally choose to work at, but I needed the money, and I kept reminding myself that it was just temporary until college started again. It was around 10 p.m., and I was out front by myself, cleaning the cutlery while waiting for the last table to leave. It was a group of 4 guys, and they looked pretty rough. Honestly, if I'd seen them on the street, I might have thought they were homeless. About half an hour later, they finally stood up to leave. I smiled as one of the men came over to the register to pay. "That'll be $42.50, I said. He handed me a bunch of crumpled bills, flashing a big grin. I recognized that kind of look all too well and braced myself for a sleazy pickup line. Sure enough, he leaned in closer and said, "Got any plans tonight, cutie?" "Thanks, have a good night," I replied, trying to make it clear that I wasn't interested. He chuckled and walked out, mumbling something under his breath. As soon as he was out of sight, I quickly cleared the table, wiped everything down, and changed out of my uniform. I waved goodbye to the last kitchen hand as I walked out and into the night. My house was only a couple of blocks away, so I walked to save on gas. I had only been walking for about 5 minutes when a loud whistle stopped me in my tracks. I turned to look, and to my horror, it was the same guy from the restaurant. He was on the opposite side of the street, signaling for me to come over with that same grin plastered on his face. For a second, I froze, but then instinct kicked in, and I began walking quickly away. My house was still about 10 minutes away, and I could feel him getting closer with every step. Panic surged through me as terrifying thoughts raced through my mind. I knew this could end very badly. I turned the corner and broke into a sprint. Tears welled up in my eyes as I heard his footsteps pounding behind me. I didn't dare look back. Then suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder and yanked me backward. I turned to face him, his face flushed with anger, the grin gone, replaced by a menacing look. He raised a finger to his lips and hissed, "Don't scream or I'll cut you." At that moment, I thought this was it, but then, out of nowhere, a surge of rage overtook me. I clawed at his face, digging my nails into his eyes. He let out a horrible scream, clutching his face in pain. I seized the moment and ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I reached my flat. With shaking hands, I fumbled with my keys before finally managing to unlock the door. Once inside, I collapsed on the floor, sobbing in relief and exhaustion. My roommates rushed downstairs when they heard the commotion. After calming down a bit, I told them everything that had happened. They were shocked but also relieved that I had managed to get away. The next day, I called the restaurant and quit. It was a shame. The owners were lovely, and I actually didn't mind the job. But I was too terrified to go back, knowing that man might still be out there waiting. I've since gone back to college, and while I'm slowly recovering, I still have nightmares sometimes, thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't fought back the way I did. I was 19 and really short on cash, so I decided to take on a second job as a waitress at a diner. It stayed open until 3 a.m. on weekdays and was open 24 hours over the weekends. On weekends, the place was always packed with drunk kids who'd come in after hitting the bars. During the week, most of the late-night crowd was made up of people working night shifts or those just getting off from work. I worked the overnight shifts twice a week because any more than that, and I probably would have collapsed from exhaustion. After 10 p.m. on weekdays, I was the only server since there weren't many customers at that hour. One night, a bigger guy walked in alone around 1 a.m. There was just one other customer in the diner at the time. I seated him, and right away he started talking to me in a flirtatious way. It was always the older, unattractive guys who were the most forward. But I had to grin and bear it, since my income mostly came from tips. He ordered a burger and a milkshake and introduced himself as Trevor. Throughout the night, Trevor kept staring at me from across the diner while I was sitting and checking things on my phone. Eventually, he was the only customer left. He called me over to the table when he was ready for the check. I went over, smiled, and gave it to him. After he paid and left, I went to clean the table and noticed he'd left a $5 tip along with his number and a winking face drawn on the bill. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash, thinking that was the last I'd see of Trevor. But a few nights later, he came back, super late again, when the place was empty. I greeted him and showed him to a table. He hit me with a, "How's my favorite server doing tonight?" Which was weird since I'd only served him once before. He started chatting again. And even though I was dead tired, I had to smile and engage. I figured maybe he'd leave a bigger tip if I acted interested. But that backfired. He thought my friendliness meant I liked him and invited me to join him on his boat sometime. Playing along, I asked what kind of boat he had. He showed me a picture of this tiny little thing that barely looked big enough for 2 people. I said, "Oh wow, my dad has a boat too." And looking back, I should have said boyfriend, but I was hoping for a better tip. He asked for my number, but I told him I wasn't allowed to give it to customers or I could get fired. He actually believed me. After he left, he once again left his number on the bill, this time with a note saying something like, "I bet you were just shy last time. Don't be shy this time. You can text me, it'll be our little secret." Followed by another winking face. Once again, he only left a $5 tip. Not only was he creepy, but he wasn't even a good tipper. I hoped that would be the last time I'd see him. But of course, it wasn't. The next week, he showed up again on a night I was working, and it was around 2 a.m. It was like he timed it to come in just when the diner was empty. As soon as he walked in, the first thing he said was, "You didn't call, huh?" This time he wasn't smiling. He said it with a serious tone. I told him I'm really flattered, but I can't text customers. He didn't respond. He just walked out, and honestly, I was relieved. I just wanted him to stop coming in. The next day at my other job, I got a text from one of the other waitresses asking if I knew who the bald guy was. I said, "Yeah, he's so creepy." "Why?" She told me he had asked for my full name. I asked if she gave it to him, and she said yes. I was so upset and felt completely uncomfortable. She said he claimed he just wanted to know the name of the really amazing waitress from the night before. Later that day, I got a text. It was from Trevor. He said, "Hey, it's Trevor, your favorite customer. I know you said you can't give your number out, so I took it upon myself to get it. Now you didn't break any rules, haha." I was completely speechless. I blocked the number immediately, hoping that would be the end of it. But a few days later, after work, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. I grabbed it and got into my car. Inside were disturbing photos, pictures of me at the diner, taken from outside in the parking lot. The photos got worse. There were pictures of my apartment, of me standing on my front deck, and of me unlocking the front door. The most horrifying one was a picture taken through my front window at night. I drove straight to the police station and reported it. The photos, along with the texts I'd received, were enough for the police to take action. That night, I stayed at my parents' house. The next day, a detective called Trevor and warned him that if he continued to contact me, it would be considered harassment and he would be arrested. I quit the diner job just to be safe. My lease was up in a month, and I moved to a new apartment. I didn't want to take any chances of him finding me again. It was the first and only true stalker I've ever had to deal with in my life.